I hope everybody's enjoying their day. And just me, Gwetch, for logging in and joining us to learn for an hour of learning. I hope everybody's day is going well and you got to at least peek out the window to see the beautiful day that's out with us and that we can participate. Looking at questions and how today's session will help you in your classroom with other administrators in everyday life of that you need to do your jobs. So I think everybody, we have opened the doors and they are all in. So we might as well get started. Buju, minoshko naukwa. Inadwan jashko, iwa isikwa na dishna kaz, beketranong na dunjaba, makwa na dodam. I kinomaga zadendao, meanwa nishnabak klandao. My English name is Jawan Shagnash. I come from Bukidnon territory and I am Bear Clan. I am the special projects teacher for the secondary program in our board. And before that, I was in the classroom for 12 years. So I'm newly into this role and we're excited to offer this series of Walking in Two Worlds, navigating Indigenous students. We were trying to really understand and think what our teachers could be using to help our students navigate the world. And when we had that idea, we really wanted to share that because as educators, we really need to understand our students and help them and empower them. So this whole series has many topics, so it can help you better understand what our students go through, because it is a totally different experience than a non-native student in your classrooms. So today, we just want to thank you to take this hour out of your day to listen and learn with us. We will have at about 4:30, we will, in the question and the Q&A box, you can ask your questions there, and we'll have about 15 minutes to get those answered for you and whatever else you may need. So today, we do have Melissa Isaac with us today. She has been for over 20 years working in the field of education as a former elementary teacher, as well as an experienced administrator. Her specialty is advocating for educational equality for Indigenous learners across the state of Michigan. Melissa understands that Indigenous learners are disproportionately impacted by negative social, mental, and emotional outcomes due to poor academic achievement in the education system. Her work is centered around bringing visibility and inclusivity to spaces that have been potentially to foster positive outcomes for Indigenous learners. In doing so, she works to build collaborative working relationships with other tribal nations, local education agencies, and the Michigan Department of Education for the advancement of the future leaders of tribal nations. Melissa knows her ancestors made unimaginable sacrifices to ensure their descendants had access to a high quality education. She now carries the responsibility of being a good ancestor to the descendants yet to come. Melissa strives to make educational contributions that will positively impact all learners. And I'm sure today this session is going to do just that. So without further ado, I will hand that over to Melissa. Miigwech.
Bonjour, hello, educational colleagues. Oh, I'm gonna start my timer. If I don't, I might go over. All right, here we go. Wabzikwe Dishnakas, Name Dodem, Saganachipwakin and Donjaba. Me llamo Mujer de los Cisnes, soy el clan de Esturión, soy ciudadana del Saguenay-Chippewa Indian Tribe de Michigan. Entonces soy Nikantlaka. So my Anishinaabe name is Swan Woman. I am Sturgeon Clan. I'm a citizen of the Saguenay-Chippewa Indian Tribe of Michigan. And I also descend from the Aztec people of southern Mexico. My English name, as she mentioned, is Melissa Isaac, and I reside in Michigan. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and my identifiers are Anishinaabe, Indigenous, or Native American in that order. I don't prefer Aboriginal. I don't prefer American Indian or Indian, although some of my people may be very comfortable with that. But that's just a personal preference. All right, let's get into this presentation. All right, so my ancestors include Chief Pontiac, Chief Polkagan, and most recently, Chief Pigo. So I descend from a long line of ancestors that led our people and did really great things for our nations. What does that mean? See that picture on the left? When I'm just a tiny girl, I have that stank face, like I question everything. If I see anybody getting treated wrong, I kind of give that look and wonder if I have to intervene to help support. I've always been an advocate for mostly our young people because sometimes they don't have the ability or capability to speak for themselves and they need our help sometimes. So now that I've introduced my identity, I'm going to introduce my academic and professional self. So I really like the theme of what's happening here, what has been put together, because that's really what it feels like. Everything that I just told you about my history, and then my culture, my identity, and now looking at the things that I do. I carry that with me everywhere I go, but those things that aren't directly associated with that is a whole nother perspective, a whole nother facet. So as she mentioned, I have a background in teaching and education. I pride myself on having an associate's degree. It's a 2-year degree from Mid-Michigan Community College. I acquired that first. It was in elementary education. I next acquired my Bachelor of Science in Education from Central Michigan University. And that was also in elementary. I have a Master's of Science in Administration. The concentration is leadership. That's from Central Michigan University. And currently I'm in my first year of the Doctorate of Educational Leadership, which is a K-12 emphasis, also at CMU. And so I am going for that terminal degree and going the whole way with my educational side of myself. So my research interests are vast. There's so much to learn and so much to know. And the more you learn and the more you know, the more questions you have and the more research you have to do to answer those questions. But I can kind of summarize that in 2 things. My first one is implementing an Anishinaabeg cultural competence model to increase self-efficacy and culturally responsive instructional practices. And so what that boils down to is really helping my white colleagues confidently and effectively teach our Anishinaabeg learners to provide better outcomes for them. That's what we want for all of our students. But sometimes, and I'm very understanding that what you don't know, you don't know. And that sometimes we need support and it's hard to ask for. And so how do we do that collectively to provide the best educational outcomes for our Indigenous learners in Canada, United States, across our nations? And then my second area of interest is in the impact of tribal schools on the cultural connectedness of Indigenous learners. So tribal schools are doing a lot to provide that cultural background. We have community events. We do a lot of work because we know the more we instill that in our learners and our students, not only is it going to improve the outcomes for our future leaders, but it's also going to empower them to be cycle breakers. And we'll get into what that means and where that came from a little bit later. So just a couple of pictures of me and my educational self there. All right, so meet the Isaac family. I cannot do any presentation without bringing the #1 support in my life to be able to accomplish things I've accomplished, to be able to continue to seek these experiences and these educational degrees. So this is in Hawaii pre-COVID. Remember that? Weren't those good times before we couldn't travel and all of the things that come with that? So this was right before that. I have my son. If you notice me with the bun on my head, my son is to my left. Um, his name is Nathan, named after his dad. He is a senior and he's getting ready to graduate this year. Yay. I also have another son. His name is Grayson, right next to him in the purple shirt. Grayson is my new teenager. He's in middle school and he's my little athlete. I want to go back to my son Nathan. He's our musician. He loves band and he's a musician. My husband Nathan, if you were here yesterday for the presentation, he's a cultural and language teacher and he has family right there in Amjinung First Nation. So we're very familiar with Sarnia and Kedjwanung and Kettle and Stony Point. We, frequent that pre-COVID. We're able to visit quite often. And then the little one that he's got his hands on her shoulders, that's our baby. That is Valerie. She is 4 years old and she's getting ready for kindergarten this year. So I have one leaving and one coming in. They spread across the gamut there. And then we're going to concentrate on this little lady that's right in front of me. That's our Gimiwan, and her name means rain. And she has a special story that's going to kick off our conversation today. So she's so cute. Of course, we all think that about our kids, right? All right, so this picture right here on the left, where I'm holding her, is when she's 7 months old. And what's really special about Gimme One is that's the first day we met. We met when she was 7 months old. And I remember it just like it was yesterday. It was July, and unfortunately, her and her siblings were removed from her family. And if you look at that picture on the bottom, that's her mama. That's her biological mom. That's my cousin. Her name, Sigwin Ba. And so Sigwin wasn't doing too well, and they removed her children. And I remember getting a call when I was at work. So I'm in the middle of my master's degree. I have my two sons, and I get a call from, I don't know what you call it here, but like Child Protective Services, asking if there's any way that I can take this 7-month-old family member into my care. And I thought, well, not just her, but her siblings as well. There's three of them. And I remember thinking there's no way I can take on three kids and do all of this. And I said, if you can find somebody else, that would be great. It's not realistic for me, along with my profession, to take on another family member. So the day goes on, and then I get another call, end of the day, end of the business day. And it's them again. And they say, we're having a hard time finding anybody to take them. Can you come and talk to them and hang out with them a little bit until we can find somebody. So in the background, I just hear these cries, like these really sad cries. And I'm like, oh no, they don't even know me. But I'm an educator. I love kids. I'm a sucker for children. And so I said, okay, I can come, but I don't know how I'm going to help because they don't know me. So I walk in and look at her. You cannot resist that. So I walk in and I say to her, another lady's holding her. I'm like, oh no, baby, why are you so sad? I'm sorry you're sad. And so she hands her to me and she's got these giant crocodile tears. And she looks up at me, stops crying, like she got me hook, line, and sinker, puts her head on my shoulder, and is just digs right in. She's so comfortable. And I was like, okay, I'll take her. So I did that. And then I had to call my husband and explain all of that. And so, he obviously was good with it. We knew it was going to be a challenge. I let him know that we could only take the baby, but fortunately, the other two were placed just down the street, actually, from us now. But our little lady lost her biological mama right before the pandemic hit, so just about a year ago. And she lost her battle to her addiction. And so she knows her mom. You can see that picture. She knows as much as she should know about what's going on. So I'm going to shift gears here and bring this all together. The picture on the right, the older lady there, that's my great grandma, Amelia. And Amelia went to the Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial Boarding School right here in Mount Pleasant. So she's one of those kids, if you know anything about residential schools and how students were taken away from their families, she's one of them. That's my great grandma. And she was taken away from her family. She went to that school and came back when she was an adult and really didn't know her family. And so her and my great grandpa got together. There was a lot of trauma. She had experienced a lot of really bad things. And so her and my grandpa had a very trauma filled life. There was a lot of domestic violence, a lot of substance abuse, a lot of coping with those really heavy things that they didn't know, didn't deserve, and didn't know how to manage. So they have a family, and my grandma is born. My grandma is born from Amelia. Well, there's this term that's called epigenetics. And what we know about epigenetics is that while my grandma was experiencing all that trauma in the residential schools, you know, about female development, she already had eggs formed as she's a young lady, future life, future generations. She already had that in her. And so as she's experiencing that trauma, my grandma's already in there. My grandma is experiencing that trauma right along with her. So my grandma's born. My grandma in gestation, before she was born, my grandma's in gestation, and she's also forming future life of future generations. That would be us. So while my great grandma is carrying my grandma is carrying my mother. And they're all collectively experiencing trauma before my mom is even born. So just for being born, my mom's already exposed to trauma. So my mom is born, and there's still those symptoms of trauma happening throughout the generations because it's just getting passed on and passed on. And the term is epigenetics. It's really scientific, but it is research-based and is a real thing. We've known that from day one. We called it blood memory, but it's called something different when, you know, there's science and that kind of stuff involved. So my mom is born. I'm in I'm an egg that's inside her, and those symptoms of trauma are still happening. And so who is also born into trauma? Me. And because I'm born into trauma, my daughters and my grandchildren are now exposed to trauma before they've even been born. And so I think about my cousin, and I think about my aunt, who have all passed away and have lost their fight to their addictions because they didn't know and didn't have the skills or the capabilities or the connection on how to resolve that or how to come to terms with it. And so Gimme One, my daughter, now has the trauma that she experienced from her grandma and her mom, and is also dealing with the loss and the grief of losing her biological mother and her grandma, all to the same stuff. And so that's one story and how trauma can impact, and really just biologically, because you hear that a lot, right? Like, oh, well, they shouldn't do that, or they shouldn't do this. And there's like all these stereotypes associated with it. But in reality, they didn't ask for it. None of us asked for it. We were born into it. And that's really an unfair foot to start on. But there is hope. It's not all doom and gloom. All right. Professionally, so that's all personal stuff, right? That was my academic self. That was my personal self. Now we're going to move into professionally what I do. So I am the tribe's director of education. I oversee an early childhood education Anishinaabemowin immersion school. I oversee a K-5 sovereign elementary school. And when I say sovereign, it's because it's a tribal school. We don't We're not a BIE school. We don't get federal funding. We don't receive state aid or anything like that. We have all the say in what we teach and how we instruct. I also oversee what's called DK-12 services. So that's a collaborative thing with Mount Pleasant Public Schools, Shepherd Public Schools, Beale City Public Schools, where we employ tribal student advocates and tutors to provide support for our tribal families and students who attend the public school system. I also oversee tribal library services, and there's 3 branches of that. One in the K-5 school I told you about, one in our tribal college, and one that is public. And anybody with a library card in the city or in the surrounding area are eligible to use that library. And we get a lot of people who use that. We also, where am I? Oh, yes. I also oversee facilities. Basically, I just call somebody and say, hey, this is broken. Can you come fix it? And then I try to figure out how we're going to manage that. I don't actually do the fixing. And then I also oversee Project Aware, which is a 5-year, $9 million SAMHSA grant to bring awareness and support to mental health issues in our students, in our families. And this is also a collaborative grant with Mount Pleasant Public Schools and Shepherd Public Schools. So I'm always trying to bridge those communities because the majority of our students do attend public schools, and they are border nations to our reservation. So how did Project Aware come about? How did we apply for this 5-year, $9 million grant? What prompted that? How did we do that? And this goes back to my days as an elementary teacher. And so educators, colleagues, you're my favorite. Administrators who are trying to support your teachers and paraprofessionals and all of the people that are, directly working with our students. My heart is there. That was my true love throughout this journey. And, I do miss going into the classroom to be able to teach. So thank you for everything that you do for our students, all students. All right, so my first year of teaching, solo teaching at that, because when I first started, I was a co-teacher. And my first year of solo teaching was for our tribal school. And the benefit of that is that I know these res kids. I live on the res. I grew up on the res. I know their grandmas. I know their families. I grew up with their moms and dads and uncles, and I basically know all their business. And they can't escape me. They know that. I tell them that, and they believe me because I see them everywhere. So my first year of solo teaching was in 2nd grade, and I'm ready to change the world, and I'm ready to, just make all this change, and really help them learn how to read and do all these really noble things. And I get my first experience with trauma. I didn't know that's what it was called at the time. And so this is Mashike's story, and Mashike is not this student's real name. So Mashike, and I know his family as well, his dad committed suicide in their home. He was a veteran, young, very young, and it was just a really hard time in the community, and it was a really hard time, obviously, for him and his family. And so after I hear about it, I wait a couple of days and I go to their house and just to sit on the bed with them. We mostly sit in silence, and she cries, on and off. We hug, we sit in silence some more, because really, what do you say to somebody who has had that experience? And then there's, that's the friend, that's the community member in me offering my presence, my support. Well, then I have to figure out, what is Mashike going to be like when he comes back to the classroom? What are we going to do? What's he going to be like? What do I tell my students, the rest of the class? Because they know. It's a small community and they know. And so I sit my class down, and this is all just because I'm trying to figure it out. And I say, because they knew when I said, we're not going to talk about it when he comes back. We're not going to ask about it. We're not going to say we heard about it. If he talks about it, me or my paraprofessional will, figure it out, and we will, um, we'll take care of it. You might come back angry. You might come back sad. You might pretend nothing happened. We don't know. So I prepared them the best that we could. And when he came back, he was angry. He dropped F bombs and the B word, and we would sweep in and we would take them out. And we would do the best that we could with what we knew at the time. And I just remember feeling very helpless. And, him sometimes just having a breakdown and crying and asking, please, Melissa, bring my dad back. And at that time, like, I just had to look away. I didn't know if I should even show emotion around him or cry with him. It just didn't seem like it was the right thing to do as a young first year teacher. And so me and my para would, like, she'd come in and check on me, and I'd tag out with her. And then I would go find somewhere to let the waterworks flow. And then it was her turn, and we would switch on and off like that. This was my first year of teaching. Fast forward, and this is about spring break, so about March break. Well, then we have my Ingen story that same year. And this is also second grade, so we're talking maybe 8 years old. And he's the youngest of 4 brothers. In the fall, we find out that his mama has pancreatic cancer. And if you know about pancreatic cancer, you know that that is not a good, people don't have a very good chance of making it through that. She's a strong lady. She holds on through the fall and into the winter. It progressed very quickly. His Christmas wish, because it was about December, is that she stay alive to spend one more Christmas with them, because that was her favorite holiday. That was their favorite holiday. And she passes away 2 weeks before Christmas. So I go to their home later that week to help clean, because it's a single dad now with his 4 boys, and they're all young. And we go there me and other teachers, we go there to help clean. We feed their bulldogs, the wrinkly bulldogs. We drop off snacks and other groceries to help out. We throw in loads of laundry. And as we're going in there, I see their stockings all hanging up by their fireplace. And it was at that point where I was tired. I was heartbroken, and I was angry with the teacher prep programs that I graduated from, because I did not know what to do. I was ill-equipped on how to console the sobbing baby who was begging me to bring his dad back. I was ill-equipped to regulate the angry emotions of a boy whose mom couldn't hold on till Christmas. And remember thinking, like, I don't think I'm supposed to be a teacher. They didn't teach me this in teacher school. And, so all of that's going on, and that's just in my classroom. I don't know what was happening in the other classrooms, because I was barely making it through my class. So we fast forward to a time where I had to step in for a principalship, because there was a lot of turnovers. You can imagine, with a very traumatic place, there was a lot of turnover. And so I had to assume the principalship for a while. And that year, a class of 11, so very small numbers, 5th grade, a class of 11, 5 of them, just under half, lose their fathers in a single school year. The wave of grief that swept through our tiny little tribal school was immense, because those dads were also somebody's uncle in the other classes. They were cousins of some of the kids in the other classes. They were neighbors. They were my neighbors. And neighbors of the other little people in the other classrooms. And I'm really thankful, looking back on that now, I'm really thankful to my staff for holding on with me during that time, because it was not easy. We were experiencing trauma too. secondary trauma, because I promise you, we would cry at work and we would cry at home when we could release. It was tough. And so then I knew something had to be done. We have to do something. And what was most fearful to me is the stereotypes and the labeling of a traumatized community. It's a double-edged sword, right? So you hear all of these stereotypes and things like that, and then here we are. We're going to put some labels on these traumas, but how do we know what to do if we can't say what the problem is? That was the approach that I took, and so I don't know a lot about trauma. I didn't even know what that was called at the time. I didn't hear about adverse childhood experiences or any of those things. Trauma-informed approaches, resiliency. Um, I didn't have that background, and so I talked to a trusted behavioral health school-based clinician. And so we sat down, and we do what good students and educators do, researchers, and we start to gather data. We pieced together this trauma study, and I call it that now because we didn't know what it was called. And we list all of these traumas that we know are happening in the school, and maybe things that we don't know are happening in the school. So we piece this thing together, and we know our families. Like I said, we're neighbors. I grew up here. We know their stories. And so we go through student by student. And it was tedious, but we put in the time and the effort and check the known traumas that those students are experiencing. 87% of our students had experienced one or more of those traumas, meaning that 13% we didn't know. They probably have, but they were unknown, because there's unknown things happening in homes sometimes, right? And 25%, and this was the thing that really just got me, 25% of our students, a quarter, were in some kind of foster care. So living outside of their homes, outside and away from, their immediate families. Just 67% were in a home where the parents were divorced or broken up, like they weren't together anymore. 21%, and this is also heartbreaking, had a deceased parent. 70% of the homes had some form of addiction in them. And these are the students that, on top of the things that we could see on the surface, they were all suffering. So these are not stereotypes. This is trauma. So then what are we going to do about it? That's the question, right? So I casually present this information to my boss, because just like I'm talking to you, I'm like, here's what's going on. Here's what we experienced. And, and he's not an educator. The way our organization is set up, he's not an educator. So I'm thinking, like, my goal, and like I'm crossing my fingers, is I'm hoping that this justifies an in-house counselor and a traditional healer, because that's important, our traditional way of healing. So he takes the information, and he doesn't really say much, but he says, "Oh, help me figure something out." And of course, I'm like, yeah, okay. So I was disheartened by that, but I'm like, we can do this. We're good at this. We know what we're doing. I have faith in, myself and my staff. So we meet the very next day. He calls a meeting, and he brings our grants department, and he says, "Melissa," he's like, "I lost sleep thinking about all of our hurting babies." He said, "Melissa, you guys are in crisis." And the empathy in his eyes, it still gives me goosebumps. The empathy in his eyes and the sound of his voice, like, cue the waterworks, like the floodgates opened. And I'm like, we are in crisis, you're right. And we're barely holding on. And that was like what I needed to say, like, this is really stinking hard. Like, this is so difficult. And my staff and I had been living in survival mode for so long, we almost normalized it. Like, this is just the way it is. These things happen everywhere. At the rates that it was happening, the population and all that history of epigenetics, this doesn't just happen anywhere, but it is very frequent and prevalent in all of our tribal nations. So we did the next, I said what we're good at, right? So we take that data, we're working with the grants people, trying to find some funding for the things that we need. We start researching trauma. And so between our data that we collected and the models we were finding, we developed this vision of being a trauma-informed resiliency-based school. And while we're doing all of that work, I'm still trying to figure out, trying to explain to people what that means, trying to, articulate what we're seeing in the experience that we're having. And so I'm going to share this video with you because when I saw this in the middle of all that work, I'm like, yes, that's what I'm talking about. So I'm going to play this. How is that?
I can hear it.
Okay.
One morning I woke up and I heard my brother crying. He was screaming so loud you thought someone was dying. "Mom, Dad," he screamed, but there was no use trying. They weren't around. I ran outside and saw he'd had a pretty bad crash. His bike was in the ditch, down his arm a bloody gash. He looked so pitiful, just sitting there in the dirt amongst the trash, crying, "I want Mom and Dad." I picked him up and started running toward my uncle's up the way. It started raining and got real dark. He could barely tell it was day. My brother cried and asked, "Sister, where's Mom?" I didn't know what to say, when the truth is, I don't know. When my uncle saw us coming, he ran into the yard. He took my brother from me and he held him in his arms. When he saw my face, I could tell he was alarmed. And he said, "What happened? Did you fall too?" "Uncle, I'm so tired of wondering why. Why do they drink? Why do they do drugs? Why do they leave us? Why?" He said, "Sister, it's hard to explain." And I said, "Uncle, try." And then he told this story.
Once this land was teepees as far as you can see. The water was clean, the land pristine. We were where we were meant to be. Then strangers came across the sea and brought with them their disease. Our people cried and prayed and sang, but it brought them to their knees.
We will rise up from the darkness. We will overcome the pain. Warrior spirits live within us. We shall remain.
Imagine that your family, and most of all your tribe, what if most of everyone you love suddenly got sick and died? And before you even had a chance to bury them and mourn, the strangers came and took away the land where you were born. And you wondered if your parents even cared as they stole you and your brother away, or if they'd been so beaten down they had nothing left to say. And then at school, they cut your hair and beat you if you spoke. The language that Creator gave our people when earth awoke.
We will rise up from the darkness. We will overcome the pain. Warrior spirits live within us. We shall remain.
Sister, I'm not trying to tell you that your mom and dad are okay, or that they're not responsible for the choices that they've made. But you see this bloody wound on your little brother's arm. If we don't clean it, it won't heal, and it'll do all kinds of harm. Those deep wounds of our ancestors still bleed within our hearts. When we remember all they've done, that's where the healing starts. So every morning when you wake, you pray this prayer out loud. Creator, help me live in a way that would make my ancestors proud.
We will rise up from the darkness.
Don't you forget get this, you can be anything you want to be.
We will overcome the pain.
Just work hard, never give up. Perseverance is the key.
Warrior spirits live within
Strength,
us.
dignity, honor, that's all in your family tree. So hold your head up high and know that.
We shall remain. We will rise up from the darkness.
Creator, help me live in a way that will make my ancestors proud.
We will overcome the pain.
Creator, help me live in a way that will make my ancestors proud.
Warrior spirits live within us.
Creator, help me live in a way that will make my ancestors proud.
We shall remain.
Little brother, we will rise up from this darkness. Little brother, we will overcome the pain. Remember, warrior spirits live within us. We shall remain.
Gets me every time. And so that's what prompted Project Aware. And oh, well, at least it was a good jam. Let me close this. All right. It just wouldn't be a Zoom without technical difficulties, right? All right, so that's what I ground the work in, the work that I do, and really trying to collaborate and help teachers learn what they don't know. And I never expect that a teacher does know all of that, philosophy there. So we're working on this grant, or we're working on a grant. We're working on asking for funding. We apply to Kellogg, we apply to all these different foundations and grants, and we just kept getting the door shut in our face. Nobody was interested in our project or what we were trying to do, and I couldn't figure out why. So we're talking like $20,000 grants, $25,000 grants. And then we finally get a yes from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Advisory. It might not be completely right, but SAMHSA. And this was the big one. And I feel like the work that we were doing and wanted to do was supposed to happen. And that's why we kept hearing no. And then we finally heard yes. And so Project Aware is what came out of that grant. And as you can see there, I believe this was Upper L. And for the first time ever in history, the Saginaw Chippewa tribe, I'm in that picture, standing next to the superintendent of Mount Pleasant Public Schools, who was standing next to the superintendent of Shepherd Public Schools, collectively came together to help all of our learners. Now, my scope was Indigenous learners, but this opened it up for all students who have experienced trauma and come from homes that have trauma as well. And so it's helping all of our youth. And so we received trauma-informed, we adopted the trauma-informed resilient schools model, and that is through Star Commonwealth. We were funded to provide equine therapy. So we have kids who go to a horse ranch and interact with the horses there. Their district and our tribal school received the school counselors that I was wanted one in the very beginning. We have a team of them who are deployed. We have social emotional learning dogs in our schools. We have a couple of black labs, Joy and Nojimo, and it's meant to engage the community. So we have community events where we give information and we try to take the stigma off of trauma. And then we also have staff who are employed to connect our families with mental health support. So it's one thing to make a referral and say, your student, they just went through something, so here's where you go. Well, you have insurance. I don't know if you guys have insurance issues, but we have all of these issues where if you really want the help, you really have to work for it. And a lot of these families are ill-equipped to do that for themselves. And so we have staff who will walk them through it, say, here's what you're eligible for without your insurance. Oh, you have this insurance, here's where you can go. And so they make those connections to follow through the services. And that is really, really key. And so those are just the higher level things. There's a lot more to it. It's a lot more complex. But we're very proud because this was, when we launched, it was a historical moment for the tribe and for our surrounding districts. Long overdue. And so this is a piece of art, and it just resonated with me because of, that video I showed you and all of the harm that was done to our students. And my job and the thing that I'm doing is transforming them back to their most beautiful original selves and having them be proud of that, because the more that they are grounded in their identity and their culture and their language, their original beings, the better that they're going to do in classrooms and life for their nations. And they deserve it. But we need to do it collectively. Tribal nations can't do it by themselves. We need allies. We need support from our public school teachers and staff, and all levels. This isn't just a teacher thing. This is administrators. So I'm politely calling out my colleagues because we're all responsible for doing this important work. And then finally, resources. I have 3 big resources here for you. I didn't want to overwhelm you with things. Star Commonwealth, that's where we're going. It identifies and shows, there's a cost associated with it though. But the safesupportivelearning.ed.gov, if you go to the trauma sensitive schools training packages, it's all free. And there's modules and all kinds of stuff there because identifying and understanding trauma is the first step. You can't just go in there and, attack it without a plan, because it is very heavy work. And then just yesterday, the state of Michigan released the My Blueprint. Very proud to say that I was included in on that, along with a lot of other experts and educators in the field, and the governor. We all applied. There's like 2,500 people who applied, and Governor Whitmer selected me to help. And so I'm really proud of that and learned a lot. But it's for comprehensive student recovery, because there's unfinished learning from the pandemic when we transitioned to remote and things like that. So it covers wellness, and it's all research-based and has all kinds of links, but it covers everything: learning, unfinished learning, wellness, the whole gamut. So that is free and it's online, and I encourage you to take a look at that as well, because I think that you are probably facing some of the same things that we're facing over here as a result of the pandemic. So just some helpful information to get you started. So with that, ooh, look at that, 44 minutes and 20 seconds. That's pretty good. I will stop sharing my screen here and welcome any conversation or questions or anything like that. Miigwech.
Miigwech, such a powerful message. And being able to openly and honestly share your experiences, that, I'm sitting there and listening, and that's what our kids go through. So many of them, but when they come into our classrooms, we don't necessarily realize that. And we need to start to think about that, because they come with so much trauma packed with layers. So miigwech for sharing your message, and that song at the end highlights so much of it. I'm sitting here getting all emotional, and then your good jams kind of pulled me out of it. I was like, oh, good stuff. So if there are any questions from the educators.
Yeah, that must have happened for a reason, for sure.
It did. It snapped me out of it. So miigwech. Yeah. If there are any questions out there, please feel free to use the Q&A. I know this is something, a hot topic that's going to be discussed at one of our big meetings. And, you know, even myself, when I first started teaching, I had a student, and the first thing I was just trying to follow rules. And I didn't even say good morning to him. I was like, hey, take your hat off. And I was like, who am I? After, like, it took me a second. And I just was like, who am I to say? I didn't even acknowledge him first. And, you know, I went back and I was like, I apologize, you know, and then you hear about things that happen, and we have to, you know, be more aware and take on our own learning of this trauma. We don't know if the kids, you know, didn't eat breakfast, or if their parents, and especially on Mondays were always hard because they would talk about the parties and their parents and the older ones having to take care of the younger ones. And this is reality.
For sure.
This is reality on reserves.
So we have a question. It says, hi, Melissa, we have local families that have gone through trauma. How can our educators address these situations without having proper training? Yeah, that, you know, I shared the story of my first years in the classroom and how I didn't know what I was doing. I look back on it and I'm like, wow, I did pretty okay. And so the best way, so if you noticed, I included in on there how close of a relationship that I had with my families. So I went to talk to the mom and sit with her. I didn't even talk to her, I just sat with her. I went to the boys' house to help do laundry and things like that because I knew I could. And so I know the message yesterday with Nathan, if you were in here, was about establishing relationships. But you can't just barge in there because they have to trust you first. And you have to build trust, because if you come in there and, you know, you act like the savior, like you're there to save them, it's going to backfire. And they're going to resent you for getting in their business. They're going to be suspicious at first. Why all of a sudden are you interested in what's happening here? And so these relationships have to build over time. And it's as simple as being present. It's as simple as your approach. Approach is huge. So like you were just saying, you know, they come in with a hat and you're like, hey, take off your hat. You know, like that's the first thing they hear when they walk in, after who knows what was going on the night before or what they're going through. And so just really softening that approach, it's not weakness when you do that. And I know we're taught that we're in charge and we set the rules and we're in control. It's a control issue. Even the hat, there may be rules, but it's a control issue. I was the same way. And so, you know, you just have to reframe, and that's hard to do, but you also have to be very self-aware of how you're coming off to this person who is powerless to you. And that's hard to do. And I know some people are like, yes, it's about time. I've been saying this for a long time, because that's how some of my staff was. They were like, I've been waiting for this. And some people are like, you're just letting them get away with whatever they want, Melissa. There are no punishment. There's no consequences. And they were mad at me. I'm like, you don't know what we talked about when they came into my office. And every time they came into the principal's office, we were getting closer and closer, and we were strengthening our relationship. And after a while, they would just do things to come and do their work with me, because they were just kind of getting yelled at in class. Or, you know, I don't know if there was actually yelling, but they knew it was a place where it was negative, and they would do their work. And so it's almost disempowering not to establish a relationship with your student and hand them off to somebody else to do that instead, because they're not going to change the behavior for you if that's what you do. Now, the other side of that is, I am very aware that there are some kids that we just will not be able to get along with. It's a human thing. There are some adults I just can't get along with. And no matter how hard we try, it's just like this missed thing. And so there are going to be some kids like that too. And that's when you do rely on your colleagues, who maybe can kind of serve as a mediator, or, you know, the whole point is that they learn. They're there to learn. And so if we can have learning happen in a way, But it's hard work though. So before you do that, you have to put in the work to establish the relationship, because it's easy just to pass them off. Get them out of your hair for a little bit, you know. And I was that teacher, and I'm speaking directly from experience. If you didn't listen to me, then you might as well not even be here. And I was proud of that. They're like, oh no, Melissa doesn't take anything. And now I'm like, wow, how terrible. This is way more effective this way, but it took a shift in my mindset to make that happen. So I really encourage our educators, our colleagues, to be self-reflective. And it's hard because sometimes we're going to see things that we don't see ourselves for what we are sometimes. And if we're able to self-reflect, that's the only way we're going to get better with that. So we have them for a large part of the day. We can make an impact, but we have to establish the relationship first.
Me watch. And I think that's what a lot of our sessions have been focusing on, is that looking at that structure and that initial relationship. And that's what it kind of, the foundation is, creating that relationship and seeing our students for everything that they are, not just kind of over them.
And we don't have to know their stories like that to use a trauma-informed approach. So you know how it is, like you're like, man, you know, Melissa's really crabby today, and you kind of have that, like, you know, that attitude, and like, well, you know what, get out of my way because I'm coming through, or, you know, whatever. I don't know how it actually, like, what you think when somebody isn't acting well, or you avoid them or whatever. You know, me coming up and asking a question and you being short with me, you know, I could have been that little boy who lost his mom. I could have been the little boy that saw the domestic violence, or whose mom or dad didn't come home. And then you like realize that, and then you change your approach. It's reactive, right? You're like, oh, I didn't know that happened to him. And so then you approach him more delicately and more gently. You should always do that. You don't always have to know the story. And so it doesn't take, I mean, it helps. I mean, we all know that's a reality, right? It helps if we know what's going on, but we aren't always going to know what's going on. Even in our tribal school, where I know the families and they're my neighbors, I don't know everything that goes on. And if you don't have that relationship with your students and the families in the community, then there's no way you're going to know everything. And so just to really try to approach people gently is just good practice for people anyway. And also to excuse yourself and show yourself grace, because we are all not exempt from trauma either. I laid mine out. I was born into it. So am I going to have a good day every day? No, but you can show yourself grace, learn from it, and continue on in a good way. So, you know, that's one thing I'll tell teachers is nobody expects you to be perfect. But my expectation, my hope is for my colleagues is that they're going to learn every day a little bit more and more and build on that, so that someday you can be sitting here and saying, man, I used to be the teacher that was this and that, and you know, now I approach it differently. And it's not a magic wand though. Don't expect that. That's what we want, right? A quick fix. We're like, all right, we're going to get trauma-informed training and here's the magic wand and poof, all the behaviors are going to go away. No, you're just going to have more strategies to use to help you in those situations. And so that's the number one thing. You do those modules, those resources I sent you, and you go through and you're like, all right, we're trauma-informed, everything's going to disappear. It's not. Because we can't control the experiences or the way that the people are processing them. So that's really important to know. You won't be sitting there not knowing what to do like I was. I don't know what to do. I'm just doing what I'm guessing here. You'll have specific strategies that you can use. And then once you use all of those up, then, you know, we can bring in the additional resources and identify exactly how we can support those families.
Oh, gosh, that makes sense. And, you know, just that human interaction rather than, you know, when you come in thinking you have all the power and these kids better be listening to me, you know, just bringing that down and seeing the kids and having that relationship and being more humble of, I may not know, that's key. That helps that relationship and especially even like high school kids. They see that right off the hop. They come in with attitude all the time. And
they know
if you're real. Mm-hmm.
No, even the little ones, no, because I saw somebody who really was trying, one of my colleagues. It's like I asked him very nicely, I'm like, girl, you were condescending. I could see that that student knew, even though you were using a soft little voice and telling him he wasn't making good choices. I'm like, he can see right through that. I saw right through
Yeah.
it. So, and that was a moment for her. And we could be honest that way. If somebody was really trying and I, saw that, I would put that more gently and, have a discussion so that they could learn from it. It should never be threatening, right? But with her, I could say that. I'm like, he could see that. He could hear it. I could see it and hear it. And so then they reflected and they fixed it. Like, all right, if I can't be genuine, I just need to say I'm frustrated. And we know that that wasn't a good choice. What are we going to do about that? That is more real than the soft little voice and the condescending tone, especially in high school, because I'm sure they're going to call you right out and then we're in the power struggle. We just need to,
Yep.
break that, the power struggle there. So I see
That makes sense.
a comment in the, you're doing awesome work.
Yep.
Melissa, so proud of you. Learning and growing as adults must continue so we can help our young ones. Yes, Robin, exactly. We have everybody has a responsibility to this. The kids do, the adults do, any level. Like I said, I really, the people who are in the front lines of all of this work, it's not just solely your responsibility. It's not just the teachers. It's not just the principal. It's not just the families. What are the families going to do? We can't help. I've heard that because people are frustrated. But it's, how can I be better? What can I do to improve as an educator? If everybody asks themselves that, how can I be a cycle breaker? I did mention that. So that work that we're doing is to break the cycles in our families. So we're doing that with our kids. Are we perfect? No, nowhere near it. But I can tell you that there are 2 less traumas in our family for our kids than what we grew up with. So, even just breaking one of those things is going to help, because then they're going to raise their families without those 1 or 2 traumas. And then those kids are going to say, hey, this is what we don't want for our family. And then it's a long game. It's long-term work, because you want to try to impact and leave that imprint on our ancestors. That's what we're doing this work for today, for the ones coming after us.
That is such a great message. And even within your message, there's so many teachings. And I think all our educators on tonight are taking that step to better themselves,
Yes,
giving up their time to learn about this. So I just want to say, Chimigwech, to that. I'm not seeing any more questions, but for you giving up your time as well to help our board, help our educators. And really, that's what I find about our people, is that we are so giving in what our knowledge and sharing. And with the work that you're doing, that is amazing. And I love how you say we're breaking the cycles, because some people don't understand those cycles that continually happen, and that the trauma that these little ones have endured and then continue. And you see these little ones more and more that have such a struggle, a bigger struggle than the next, but maybe not that much. So I appreciate all of you sharing tonight and being so open and honest and sharing your traumas, because that's really what teachers need to see. And that's the real relationship that needs to take place between teacher and student. And to each educator, let's do a little bit better for ourselves, for our students, because what we pass on essentially hopefully gets through, or for our ancestors, for those ones yet to come. So Miigwech for sharing. I appreciate all of that, and I appreciate everybody here tonight. I just want to say Chimigwech, and if you have any last words, and we will end her there.
Yeah, I just want to say Miigwech, to thank you to my fellow colleagues here, our educators, our community members, if there's any on, our administrators. We all have something to contribute to this work. And I can tell you, we've never met, a lot of us, maybe we have, but I believe that this was a first step, or maybe it's the beginning of what you're going to do for your Indigenous learners and trying to understand them. And so I am very grateful for that, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. So Miigwech to everybody. And how many more days are left? We are
We have next week.
oh yeah,
believe.
one more week.
We have a whole week next
You can
week.
do it. You can do it. I'm rooting for you from over here. You guys can do it.
Chimigwech. With that note, we will send everybody off and have a great evening. But I appreciate everybody tonight. Chimigwech for sharing everything, Melissa, and hope everybody has a great evening.
Bon appetit, everyone.
Bon appetit.